Good morning or good afternoon. We'll be getting started in 4 minutes. 4 minutes, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. We'll be getting started in 2 minutes. 2 minutes, everyone. Alrighty. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Thank you for joining New Horizons in Business Analysts. We'll begin in 1 minute. Before we start, I have some housekeeping notes. First, please find your chat box. This is down on the bottom row, and where you can type to me, the session moderator. You can use this for any technical support questions. We will use the Q&A box for a question period at the end of the session. These are questions for our speaker. This Q&A box can be found at the bottom to the right of your chat box. Please reserve the chat box for technical issues and the Q&A box for questions for Frank. Let me introduce, where are we there? Frank Kolowski. He is the president and founder of Knowledge Consultants Incorporated, a firm focusing on artificial intelligence, strategic and tactical business analysts, data science, and analytical algorithms for improved business analysts. The 100+ engagements over a 30-years inline management and consulting experience provides a unique perspective on analysts. His numerous publications include conference presentations, papers, and 5 books on business analysts as an author, editor, and contributor, focusing on the benefits of analytics for organization performance. Please join me in welcoming Frank.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. That sounds interesting. It makes me sound like I'm 100 years old, at least. In any event, I did a lot of small projects with a large number of companies and some very large projects. So I have a range of project size that I've dealt with. An awful lot of it, probably better than 50 or 60% of it, has been in some form of business analysis, and a lot of it on the strategic and tactical level. And over the years, which leads into what I'm going to talk about today, we realized that there was not a lot of really good formal rigor. And I started exploring this several years ago in looking at like SWOT analysis and looking at the critiques by people like Michael Porter and that. And they had some very strong comments about the lack of rigor and the extensive use of what you call descriptive analytics. That is, you talk to somebody, they give you a description of what the issue is, and they give you a description of the solution. And if they were going to have any type of hard analytics, it was usually a projection of something that was historical in nature. So if they have a BI system or something like that, they're going to do trend analysis and create trumpet diagrams and stuff like that, which turns out not to be the best way to do this when you're looking for forward forecasting. So that said, I call this the New Horizons because we introduced different techniques of business analysis that are more forward-looking and a little more reliable in analyzing what's going on. So I will get started and directly go through this now. I want to make a comment about the slides. Some of the slides have a lot of information on them, and I will only be introducing them and telling you what's on them and maybe commenting about one or two topics. Then I would suggest if you're interested, please download the presentation, look at the slide, and look at the more detail on the slide or the rest of the detail on the slide, because it'll help you understand better the scope of what you have to deal with when you're doing this type of business analysis. So with that said, let me just get started. Here's what I'm going to talk about. There's just, 4 topics. Actually, the last one is the shortest. I want to talk about how this has been emerging, the focus on business analysis. That is, it's shifting now to the strategic and tactical perspective of an organization. In the past, what we had done is gone straight from strategic to the execution, and then oftentimes link in tactical, so you missed a lot of things. And what we do is we use workflows with analytic ensembles, and these analytics are forward-looking analytics. And I want to talk a little bit about the data collection, what you have to look at when you're doing something like this. I have a simple workflow example that uses 3 types of ranking schemes, and I'll talk about each one. And we use a mix of statistical and neural net subjective analysis techniques. And I'll talk a little bit about how you interpret the results and where human interaction comes in and where you can use automation. One of the phrases that I use to describe the use of automation, particularly Gen AI and stuff like that, is to let the technology do your legwork. There's a lot of legwork that can be done automatically now, which we used to spend a lot of time in research libraries in the past and using Google queries, which didn't always work really well, using Google Analytics, stuff like that. But there are some better things that are emerging now, better techniques to provide a more accurate picture of what's going on in the analysis. So here's what the issues are. When you look at strategic and tactical analysis, the key thing that comes out consistently, probably over the last 10 or 12 years since we've been looking at this in detail, is a failure to propagate alignment. And what we mean by alignment is business alignment, and within that, strategic alignment. Strategic alignment being the connection between the landscape, the external environment, and your strategic perspective of that time. And keep in mind, you have 2 strategic perspectives, the one that you're in the middle of today and the one you want to go to that you're going to determine after you do strategy formulation. Okay, so there's a lot of other things that they have mentioned that are missing, like there's too much focus on descriptive analysis, there's few business analysis tools that focus on there's not much analytical rigor, and so on and so forth. And you may or may not know that there are over 75 documented models and no integration across those models. And when they say business models, we're talking things like the balanced scorecard, the 5 forces, value chain, the BCG matrix, and so on. And there's a book that lists these, and there's a website also that lists them. I have close to 100. And nobody's bothered to decompose them and integrate them. We took the top 10 and decomposed them and found out they had so much stuff in common that you should focus on the common stuff, because then you could branch it to any one of the models. And today, the type of analysis that's done is consuming and costly, and usually done by an external firm and quite expensive. Now, if we take a look at business alignment as a strategic example, the alignment fades as you go down. What that means is the top management understands the alignment issue and the strategies, okay? They understand the strategies, but there's a big drop in understanding as you go from that to the senior management, from the senior management to the middle management, from the middle management to the supervisors. And I can give you an example of that, of a firm that actually that I worked with. We did a 1-year project with a firm that called itself a strategic company. When I asked them what they meant, they says, you can go ask anyone in the company what the company strategies are and see what response you got. So while I was out in a plant, I actually asked someone who was pushing a broom, and they got 4 out of 5. I thought that was pretty good, for somebody who's pushing a broom. They understood what strategies. Not only that, they knew how they fit. And here's the more interesting one. The second one here is top management is not aware that alignment is an issue. And there's an interesting study that was done by Sloan Management School in 2018-19 timeframe. And they found out that all the top management thought that since they communicated what the strategies were, everybody must know what they are. And the fact of the matter, it was not true. In fact, by the time we got to the supervisory level, only 15% of the supervisors could name 1 to 3 of the strategies of the business out of 5. And so the management was quite surprised by this, the top management. And you can go on and take a look at the rest of these because they also apply, but I won't spend the time to go into them. So it becomes a question of participation, not just the communication. Now, these couple slides have long lists, and I just want to talk about 1 or 2 items on each slide. This keeps coming up. And if you look at the issue and the successful strategy development, look at the top one. And the successful strategy development is integration with tactical and operational planning. And look on the right, lack of clear, realistic goals. If you don't have that tactical and integration with the tactical and operational planning, you are not going to have clear goals because the people don't grasp them because they're not connecting. Clear and achievable objectives, that links also to the realistic goals. And again, the issue that they found is neglect of tactical and operational alignment. This is across a number of different studies. This is like a summary of what we found, taking a look at different studies. But these are interesting lists to take a look at because you see they come back time and time again to the alignment issue. The tactical development. How different is tactical development from the strategic development? So you have a list of things for tactical planning and a list of issues with it. So the success was, look at this, clarity in linking tactical steps to strategic objectives. That is the reverse of aligning strategy going down. So you've got people that don't seem to understand what strategic objective they relate to. What we found out is one reason for this is oftentimes individual operating parts of an organization, particularly in big companies, have their own strategies, setting sessions, and if they're in different businesses, they'll have their complete strategy formulation difference with an attempt to integrate this at the corporate level. I mean, I've dealt with some really big companies. When I say big companies, I'm talking about 50 to 100 billion a year. That's pretty big. And they all seem to have this situation except for one that we worked with. And it was not the strategy company. It was a company that was, when we worked with them, they were 42 billion in size, and they had no strategic planning group at all. And it took a while, for me to get my head out of my MBA saying every company should have this and realizing that they had a really interesting way of going about doing their business and are very successful at it. And I won't go into detail. It takes a little bit of time to explain that. The interesting thing is look at the tools, the different types of tools that you would use if you're doing strategic planning versus tactical planning. And you can see that the tools, tactical planning tools, tend to get much more specific than the strategic planning tools. And when you look at the list under strategic planning, you begin to realize outside of the strategy mapping of balanced scorecard, a lot of that is subjective. That, when you're listing the different financial and customer things and the employee things, process stuff, they're fairly subjective. When you get into the strategy mapping, they get more specific, but again, that is all historical data which you're linking together. And in fact, we talked to an organization, this was a couple of years ago, who sells business process management software, and part of it is the strategy mapping, which is not unusual. Companies have combinations like that. And this company has about 2,500 installations, which is pretty big, companies that have their product. And I asked, how many companies are using strategy mapping? They said they think 5 or 6. Well, that's really interesting. I said, why are they not using it? They said it's difficult to use. I says, do they go through training? Yes, they understand how to do it in the tool. What they don't understand is how to apply strategy mapping to the business. For example, what should they focus on the relationships between the components? He says they had no idea how to analyze and figure that out. Well, we could show them. Part of that is embedded in the type of things I'm going to show you in this presentation. But this stuff should be pretty familiar to you, especially things like pestle analysis and scenario planning. And you've probably heard about all of these at one time or another. If you've done analysis work, you've probably heard about these. There are a lot of these. These are what are called the business models, that there are over 75 of them that are out there. So aligning the strategic direction with the external environment seems to be the most critical issue. And the main reason is the organization has to remain relevant and it has to be competitive. And we talk about asynchronous competition. That is, you have to have something that gives you an edge over your competitors. That makes it asynchronous. If you're both are doing the same thing, you're going to be knocking heads all the time and you will not have an advantage. And one of the things that we found out is if you have a well-aligned strategy, your proactive responses get much better to opportunities and threats. You don't suddenly find out you're missing the skills or you're missing the capability or you're missing something else that you need to make the response work. And you can also have misalignment. That is, strategies are connected to the wrong tactics and to the wrong execution. And we find this out when we're doing operational work. We usually see, why are people doing this, or why do they think this supports the strategy for brand development or something? And they don't really know that's what they were told. So it gets kind of interesting as you get into the real world on this stuff. Now, there are a lot of business analysis movements that are started now. People want more sophisticated analytic workflows, and at the same time, they don't want it to be difficult. The phrase they don't want to hear is that says it costs too much, takes too long. You don't want to hear that. They won't do the work of analysis. They'll go ask an expert or a consultant or something to do a quick assessment, which will turn out to be moderately expensive. And we found that if you group suites or assembles together of analytics, you can play one analytic against the other to get validation of your thinking. And we found out this is very much like when you're into competitive intelligence, or if you're into CIA type of intelligence, always have 2 or 3 sources. Don't depend on just one source. That's what we're doing here. We're saying, okay, use 2 or 3 analytics. I heard a phrase a couple of years ago that says, we will torture the data until it confesses. And I really like that phrase because it means I'm going to find the algorithm that gives me the answer that I want, which I find always very interesting because I've seen a lot of managements work that way. So you have to focus on strategic and tactical analytics here. You want to be forward-looking. You want to be hybrid. You want to use a combination of subjective and objective criteria. And this is going to be multi-criteria decision-making. We use 10 to 15 criteria and decision-making in the strategy and tactical execution. What's interesting is if you're in a PMI space, then you're familiar, or at least know about the analytic hierarchy process. That is a method of working on prioritizing the criteria when you have multi-criteria decision-making. Usually decisions-making criteria are 5 to 10 different criteria. We had to use, it's very difficult to use, evidently. We couldn't find very many people that are actually using it. We actually found, I think it was one organization that has an Excel spreadsheet capability. There's a product out of Canada that works with the basic AHP technique, of which Dr. Saate, who passed away recently, said in 2018 doesn't represent the real world. And when he explained that, it made a lot of sense of why it works. It just is, it's a very narrow view. When you have preferences, I don't know how familiar everybody is with the analytical hierarchy process. It's based on preferences, and all of us have come in touch with these at one time or another in our careers. For example, do you prefer green over red? Do you prefer blue over green? Do you prefer blue over red? And when you get a series of answers, you can calculate the preference of colors. This is the same type of technique, only instead of having colors, you're using maybe your strategic actions that you want to do. And you want to get some analytical way, you apply criteria to that. You want an analytical technique that'll rank them for you and tell you where you want to put your investment, rather than putting your finger to the wind and guessing at it, which is pretty much what we do now. or you call in a consulting firm that has a lot of experience. Now it gets very expensive. It takes more time, both from you and from your consultant, because they have to interview a lot of people because they're going to go get the material out of everybody's head, organize it, and present it back to you. I know. I spent 5 years with A.T. Kearney doing this sort of thing as part of my career. And so what became very clear, and the example that Saad used was really good. He said, look, he says, if you have in front of you an agreement and you have the Israelis on one side and the Palestinians on the other side, they don't have the same preferences for that agreement. So you need bi-directional preference. Well, interestingly enough, we've been doing something like that as one of our analytics does that. And it sort of breaks apart the analytical hierarchy process and does parts of it and then integrates the parts. The analytical hierarchy process will allow you to do a ranking of criteria on top of criteria. And we found that, one, that's time consuming. Two, people don't usually understand what it means. And three, it's not really needed. If you're looking at 80-20, we can get 80% without doing that. If you really need that last 20, we can show you how to do that without doing AHP. Okay. So, because it's just hard. It works, by the way. It does work because I've done it. Interestingly enough, I've also used ChatGPT to do it, see if it could also solve a simple problem, and it did it correctly. I used a tool that I found, a very simple tool, which handles a one-way preference only, and I used ChatGPT, and I did it by hand. I did all three, and they all came out the same. So I know that this thing works, okay? So choosing analytics that you want to use, that could be confusing. There are actually a lot of analytics, and we have some that are not on the open market that we develop for our own use. So, you have a lot of them, and there's a long list of issues when you're dealing with analysis. You have missing analytics. You need an analytic, nobody has it. You want an analytic that will do some kind of ranking, or maybe path to point type analysis, or maybe you don't want to do a context analysis. There's no explanation on how you would do it or a tool to do that. We have and have used all of these at one time or another. And we find that the tools that will support the algorithms that we develop to do this. And anybody can develop these algorithms. They just have to have the motive to do that. In some cases, like at AHP, it's difficult to understand and it's complex, but it does work. And if you want to take the time to use it, I can show you how to make it work for bidirectional. And oftentimes you need high skills. It takes a lot of work to understand how to do some of these analytics. You would like a tool that is click, 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 and I get an answer. All I have to do is figure out what the answer means. So improve predictability in business analysis results. That's what you're looking for. How can I look forward as best as possible so that I can get a lot of value out of the analysis I'm doing on a strategic and tactical level? Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. And one of the things that comes out on top over the years that people have commented about the different business models of that, better analytic support seems to be dominant. More active management participation, yeah, you could have that, or better, more reliable results. Yeah, most of them actually work, but they also are very difficult to do. They're hard to understand, and they're costly to have somebody else do them. And you want to be able to make more decisions in less time. I've got a lot of examples of this, where when you're using a complex technique, you can only make a certain number of decisions in a limited amount of time. And when you use, if you can make that technique very easy to use and put the difficulty underneath the covers, then you can evaluate more decision options in less time and come up with a better set of strategies for your organization. Anyway, so a good solution to improve the analysis is use what we call an ensemble approach. Like an orchestra is an ensemble of instruments that get a particular sound. We use multiple analytics to make a particular point of analysis. We don't use just one analytic. So the second thing is you want to get a competitive advantage of this, because if you're able to do better and faster decision making than your competitors, you will have a distinct advantage. That means you'll be able to respond quicker. You'll be able to see if you can compete quicker. You'll be able to see what option you have to take. Maybe you're going to have to go outside and get support to get a competitive position. And above all, it helps assure that you will maintain your business continuity. It helps you survive from year to year. A lot of times, organizations don't see themselves dying. They don't realize that they're on a particular path, that over time they will die. The only company I know that lasted a long time was the Canadian explorers from the late 1700s. The ones who make the point blank blankets, they actually just closed up about 5 or 10 years ago. And they lasted 150 or 60 years. That's a long time. So the workflow ensemble approach, that's what we do, and that's the kind of example I'm going to show you in a few minutes. So it's a collection of analytics that have repeated use. That means 3 types of ranking, or 3 types of this, or 2 types of that, or 4 types of this. It depends on how complex the decision is and how many options you have in terms of analytics. We tend to use objective, subjective, and semantic analytics. A semantic analytic, very simply, if I have 2 processes, I want to know what the difference and the similarities between them, I have to have a semantic compare capability, and it has to be variable. That is, you have to be able to compare on a percentage of match, not just an exact match. An exact match will be misleading. You very rarely will get a good exact match. For example, if you compare 2 purchasing processes and you see engineering expense account and you see marketing expense account, if you look for exact matches, they'll never match. But if you look for a partial match, you'll get expense account, and you'll find something that you're looking for. So that's the way you have to look at semantics. It's not perfect matches. It's suitable things like, are you doing strategic decision making? Strategic decision making is forward looking, and it lives and breathes on subjective type criteria. And subjective criteria are things like small, medium, and large, okay? And that type of analysis has been used in sports. In fact, the movie Moneyball is about that concept. It's been used in sports for 15 or 20 years. We've been using it on our consulting for at least 20 or 25 years. And we learned the same things as Saate learned on using subjective criteria, that it's good to have 7 to 9 in your range of options. Small, medium, and large is not discrete enough. You have to have more options for them. We found out also when you're going forward and people are trying to estimate things like expense, what your expenses may be, it's not a good idea to give them numbers. It's a better idea to give them subjective things like small, medium, and large, for them to say, well, the expense increase will be small, or it'll be medium, or it'll be large, or it'll be humongous, something like that. That's what you're looking for. The analytics with related purpose, and the data preparation is the same. That's what you want. Don't have to have different data preparation for every algorithm. That takes a lot of time. You have to have a standard format that you're using across all the algorithms. You save a lot of time when you do that. So the algorithms that you're going to use across tactical and strategic and landscape analysis should be the same. They're just working on different data. It's kind of like statistics. You don't care what you're analyzing a statistic about. It's just that the formula is going to be consistent across all the problems that you have. It's like a standard. And this is adaptable to the particular problem. That is, the workflow is according to the type of analysis. If you're doing mergers and acquisitions, you might use a different set of analytic workflows than you would for strategic alignment or for situation analysis. Now, question we've been asked often is, why not use business intelligence for forward-facing analysis? Okay, having been grown up in the data warehousing, and I'm kind of a data bigot in background and originally when I was in my technical years, and I understand a lot about databases of all types and different ways of looking at them. And I spent a lot of time doing data warehouses for different companies in my early days. And finally, we really have pretty good business intelligence that comes out of looking at it. Some of the best reporting I've ever seen is now coming out of BI. You can do drill down, you can do roll up, you can do slice and dice, you can do ratio analysis, trend analysis, you can do all that stuff. And that is really helpful. 30 years ago, you couldn't do this. You were lucky to get it all into a warehouse, And in fact, all we knew at the time was to build an atomic warehouse. We didn't know how to build anything else. Now, BI focuses on objective data. It's monitoring its quantitative values. There are some that have search capability. That's not really an analytic. That's a descriptive type component of looking for something. Okay. And you have good data discovery and symptom analysis, but it's after the fact. Remember, this is history. You kind of want to know where you've been rather than where you're going. Strategy is where you're going. Tactics is how am I going to get there? And your operation says, these are the steps I have to take to make sure that I get there. So the nice thing to do is to try to pair some of the ensembles we do with the results of your BI. And there's ways to do that without, I won't go into here. So I'll talk first about the data collection. Now you'll see slides which are better off to look at later on, but I'll tell you what they're about when you get through them. You need three things. You need a category, okay? If I'm using Pestle for landscape analysis, then one of my categories is technology, and I'll have a whole series of elements in that technology, like Bitcoin may be one, and I may have IoT type stuff as another one, and I'll probably have, the targets usually get like 12 to 15, maybe up to 18, but more than that starts to muddy the water. I will tell you right now. This is a form of those who have a math background. This is part of category analysis. You're stripping out some of the detail in order to focus on the core issues. And category analysis covers that. So this is a concept out of that area. We use three types of criteria: subjective, objective, and contextual, which is usually semantic within. That's another category mathematics type thing, is contextual data. For example, what is the context of a particular strategy? This context is defined by all the things it connects to, all of its touch points. That complexity is part of category theory. So the data collection approach is pretty straightforward. We have short executives and subject matter expert workshops for focus. We use generative AI for data collection. Now this is tricky. Most of the people that I know in companies that are using Gen AI are doing generation of documents. We don't do that. Okay, we have a different type of prompt. We have now developed a series of prompts, some with literally are fill in the blanks. You just put the industry you're in and a couple other things, and you go and you get your list out of it. And you want to know if you're having subjective, objective, or semantic type of criteria. That's what you have to know, because you're going to start relating these things. Here's an example. Product lines for a manufacturing company. They make air conditioning units, cooking, electric cooking stuff, gas cooking stuff, and so on. Then you say, okay, I have a series of AI projects that I want to do. This is actually real. This comes from a client, overseas client that we have. And so you got a list of AI projects. I think there were 17 of them. And I'm going to use these AI projects throughout this. Then you have a series of business strategies. Then you have business applications, which we're all familiar with if you do operational business analysis. And then you have the global pestle markets they're interested in. That's specific to this particular organization. And then you have core processes. This is a set of core processes they have in this organization. And so you can't see this one because that's behind me. I can't see it. You can see it. So this is probably the list. Yeah, this is the list of technologies. Okay. This is a manufacturing firm, and there's other core processes. They are the AI projects they're interested in, the business. And if you look, each one of these is a category. That's my point. And when you download and take a look, you can stop this and see what kind of things are in each one of these. There are over 25 commonly used subjective criteria. Here are the top 10 out of the 25. Not all of them are used on everything. These seem to be used on probably 80% of the projects that we work on. How difficult is this thing to do, or to implement, or to have, or to create, or to discover? What is its effectiveness? What is the impact, which is different than effectiveness? The effectiveness is how well is it going to work, and how big is the impact is it going to be? How important is this to the company? What is the likelihood that we can get this thing to work? What is the risk involved with it? Now, this is not risk from a quantitative perspective. That's a separate part of risk assessment, okay? We do that, but it's linked into this, not a part of this. This is the small, medium, and large type of risk. What kind of skills do I have? Do I have great skills, poor skills, no skills? What's the priority of this? Okay, the CEO wants to do this. Maybe it has a high priority. But when you analyze this, by the way, you may come up with a completely different list than the CEO would have. What is the organization value? And one of the things we put in here is the risk remediation cost. And we generally use a subjective range for this. When we go back to doing risk assessment and analysis, we put in quantitative values for this, because you have to estimate a quantitative value to get a correct risk remediation, a risk loss, and so on. You have to estimate the loss and all that when you're dealing with risk. Here are some of the objective ones. Typical, revenue, expensive, number of things that you built, how many cars, how many refrigerators, or how many whatevers, how many customers that you service, and so on. Machine values that you have, IoT sensor values that you're getting back, because organizations have a couple thousand IoT sensors. They all come back. Some of them are binary. Some of them give you a number. and you have to have capability to handle all of them. And a number of cars per day you're going to build, this sort of thing. These are objective type criteria that you would have. We generally will do some with the direct objective values. Sometimes we will substitute a subjective approach, like in Moneyball, for these. Now, analytic workflows. We use the ensemble approach to create an analytic workflow. We figure what are the analytics we need to achieve the result. Then we work backwards and we say, okay, what would the workflow work like? And we're developing a standard set of workflows now. We have them for like situation awareness, for SWOT analysis, for strategic alignment. We're finishing up on that set now. And we've used them over the years. We just haven't documented them in a real nice manner. The goal here is to increase the quality and the speed of the decision making. You want to be able to choose between your options in a more quick and better manner. Okay, so you have to find out, you create these workflows. We generally use anywhere from 2 to 4 analytic techniques, average of 3. Most of them have 3, probably 75% have 3 analytic techniques. Some have only 2, some have as many as 4. Okay, and the example I'm going to use is evaluating that set of AI projects you saw. Now, here's another one. Here are some of the other things you can use this type of technique for. All this portfolio analysis, which you're going to see going forward. In fact, I gave this talk to a group, PMI group, at one time of how you do portfolio analysis using these types of analytics. But you can do projects, processes, strategies. You can analyze anything in a portfolio and get a ranking out of it using these techniques. You can also do this with requirements. We have done it with sets of requirements on particular agile projects that people are working on. What we haven't seen is enterprise level requirements to look for commonality that you could put in the library modules that people can use. They can build functional modules, out of this. The kids learn how to do that in college now. And it's good for analyzing business and enterprise architecture. Our analytics are very applicable, and we did a workshop, I think, we did a couple of workshops for IIBA some years ago on business architecture and how you link them all together. You can get the strategic and organizational alignment problem with easy doing this stuff. It's good for doing mergers and acquisitions. And it uses what is called a value quadrant analysis. SWOT is a value quadrant. Value quadrant is any 4-box that you're going to put things into and make a strategic decision on which box you're going to be in and work in. That's what SWOT does. It has analysis based on these relationships between strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's not rigorous. That's one of the biggest complaints. This is not rigorous. It is kind of a descriptive approach, which you've done by getting together as a group and listing things off the top of your head as best as possible, or hiring somebody that'll do a lot of research for you. So here's what happens when you do rankings. We did 3 analytic rankings. There's a composite algorithm for ranking across all of the criteria. This is one of our variations on AHP. We create a composite value for this. Here are the different criteria that were used. Okay, then we use a correlation technique of all these different against each other to find out which ones correlate the most, which ones correlate the least. And then we have a neural net influence. There's a specific technique which uses genetic algorithms that you can determine the influence of one of your features over the other features. And it took a while to develop this, but it does work, and it gives you an interesting ranking. And then you've got a display like this. So you can compare these 3 in a 4-box display and look at which one is pushing it into one box or another box. Okay, so if you want, one of the things that we found out is that when we're looking at AI projects, the number of neural goals is critical to the success of a project. Very large projects have a very high failure rate. There are very few that have been successful. And in fact, there are several that are documented. I think Tom Davenport did a presentation on this, and he was working with a company, which I think was Anderson Clinic in Texas, who wanted to use neural nets to see if they could locate a path for a cure for cancer. And they also had 7 small AI projects. All 7 of the small projects worked. The big one cost $60 or $70 million and failed. Okay, so the reason is these are really hard to do. Just simply they're hard to do. But here are the different criteria and the ranking. Okay, so that was the ranking. Here's the correlation matrix on them. These are the high correlations of when you have the green. That means if that criteria and the one it correlates with are going to be moving together. So you need to look at both of them. So if you look at like the risk loss and the estimated number of neural goals, you go, aha, if I have a lot of neural goals, I'm going to connect right with a risk loss. This is the way you use these things. You very quick to take a look at them. And then this one, this is you can also get a rank. The tool we use has to produce the rank, and you see this comes out on top. This is the one where you're using the influence. The product that was used here is AI Trilogy. Okay. I'm not claiming them as a product of ours. I want to say that's something, and we've been using this product since the mid 1990s. It's a long time. So we were fairly familiar with using AI. You can see here the risk loss out of all of them is the most influential, and you can rank them. This is the most influential, second most, third most, and then look at these other ones. They're hardly influential at all. But here is one. And what I do then is like when I was working on this project, I just take these things out and find out which one of the four win, and that's what the client was going to focus on. And this particular client was real interested in risk loss. Actually, it happened to be a government agency overseas. So tactical business analysis, getting insight from analytics. Okay, look what happens when you do this. Okay, this 311 and 132. That tells you that this guy was third, this guy was first, this guy was first. And this is the most effectiveness across all of these seems to be the most important thing. And the second one, which is interesting, is estimated number of goals. Now remember, this criteria is specific to AI projects. It doesn't work real well when you're doing conventional projects because the goals is a technical thing when you're dealing with AI. Okay, it's the thing you're trying to predict. For example, that's a goal that you're looking at, and this guy is number one here, number three here, and number two here, and you can create a little ranking scheme, and you can see this is number one. It ranks pretty high on 2 out of 3, and this is scattered across the top 3. So they're very close, 1 and 2, but these are the things I would then focus on. And when I was working with this client, the first part of their strategy was not to have too many goals in applying AI in those 17 projects. I says, you pick the ones that you want to apply a limited number of goals, and those will be the most successful. That's what they did, and they worked. If I blow up that 4 box that you saw a couple slides back, it looks like this. Here's the effectiveness one you'll notice, and here's the number of goals. Stuff that's in this box here, those are the ones that are your high hits. Those are the ones that have the most influence. These have the least. These are probably the safest thing to work on, and then if you want to train a group, this might be a good place to train them. There's nothing here that would really create a problem because what it tells you is these criteria are relatively independent of each other. That's what it's telling you. So you're not doing multiple damage at one time. You only got one thing to worry about in each case. So you get an interpretation. We call this the interpretation quadrant. It says, okay, when you do quadrant type stuff, whether it's risk with a 5x5 that has 25 cells or something that has 9 cells, the typical is 4, 9, 16, and 25. For each cell, you need to have what you're going to do if a dot shows up in that cell. Okay, so that's why people like things like 4 boxes, because you only have to come up with 4 sets. Okay, now this is the last slide in the presentation, and if you have any questions, you can ask them at that time, and we have to figure out how to get to the questions. The second thing is, feel free to send me an email and ask a question. I'll try to respond to all the emails. I do get emails after these presentations because a lot of this material is stuff people have never seen before. Now, chaos is a little bit different. Statistics, machine learning, and AI are history focused. What happened plus statistical trend type linear projection. Chaos tends to be forward focused. What might happen using nonlinear projection or linear with initial conditions variation. Now, the way it works in most of the chaos work you see today, like weather forecasting, is you have a nonlinear equation, which they then differentiate to get the linear equation, which they then put into a chaos calculator, and they specify what the intervals are, and it runs out for a particular model a line that will go forward. And eventually they produce what you see on the TV for forecasting, what they call a spaghetti diagram, which is a bunch of fingers coming out. And what you have to realize that each one of those fingers has been developed by a particular model. They use 15 to 18 models in weather forecasting, and you end up with 15 to 18 spaghetti strings out of it. What you get out of chaos is really interesting. By nature of the butterfly effect, the picture of the butterfly, is it focuses on the strange attractor part. It focuses and narrows down the range of what you can see. That is, in the past, the range of like a path of a hurricane was huge, very wide, and very quickly it diffused like a day or two out. Now you can get a pretty accurate, much narrower focus on where the hurricane is going, spread over 6 or 7 days forward. That's really a big improvement. Now you can do this with weather, because actually weather is easier to forecast than the stock market. And the reason is stock market uses human behavior, and human behavior is very difficult to forecast. But physics, if something is based on physics and you can get the equations, you can do it. And they've done that over the last 25 years with weather. That's all it took was 25 years to come up with a number of different models. And if you watched enough of the weather like I do, because I'm a pilot, you begin to realize, well, the European model might predict this, and the U.S. model predicts that, and the other kind of model predicts this. They have collections of models, is what they have. And they run under different assumptions in Europe than they would here because the geography is different. Okay, that's pretty fast going through these slides. And so I'm ready for any questions or comments you want to make, or if you want to send me an email, that's fine also. David, you still there?
I'm still here. I don't see any questions, but attendees, feel free to
That's okay.
You can type them in
Okay.
the question box or raise your hand.
Who's got the, let's see, how do I see the questions in chat box?
At the bottom row, you should see both chat and a Q&A box. And so far we are.
What can I see? Okay, I don't see any questions so far. I hope we didn't put everybody to sleep.
Perhaps they're all just digesting that rather dense presentation you gave them all.
Well, it is. It's I've done this presentation. This is the third group, and I've been tuning it up because the questions I've gotten earlier on what kind of data do I work on and stuff. So I wanted to show at the beginning, but not spend a lot of time on it. And we have tools that do this, and I'm not selling tools or anything. So I don't. The only one I had to talk about was AI Trilogy because we use their neural net tool. And other tools I use don't have a neural net capability. I have asked that they develop one. That would be really useful because then you can integrate it much more easily into the workflows.
I will remind our attendees that this presentation will be available. It usually takes about 4 business days for it to be uploaded. So likely by beginning of next week. And you can always reach out to Frank personally. He is very passionate about the subject and willing to answer some questions by email if you.
Yeah, most of the questions in the past have been through email because people, they want to relook at the presentation and frame the question better, stuff like that. And I greatly appreciate that because it makes it easier for me to answer them.
Perfect. Well, we have one question from Priyanka. Do you know of any AI tool we can use in business analysts in everyday life?
Say that again. I can't see them. Which do I have to click on to see that?
Q&A at the bottom to the right of share.
Oh, right of share. I got okay. In day-to-day life, if you mean on the at work, yes. In fact, AI Trilogy, and I have no vested interest in them. Their stock market analysis tools are the most commonly used and a favorite tool for analyzing stocks. They're number one in that. But applying it in the business, they've asked me several times if I want to write some of the stuff up that we do because they don't have a whole lot of business use. And I find it, the interface is not that great, but the product is very reliable. And, because it does all three types of neural net that you need. It does predictive classification and genetic algorithms. And when you're dealing with analysis based on criteria, you don't have a lot of rows to deal with. None of this, by the way, none of this analysis uses millions of rows of data. This is not like consumer or transaction data. That's operational. I think that the largest set of data we ever worked with in my entire career is about 10,000 rows, and 5,000 of those were process names. That'll give you an idea. That was a big company. So you don't have huge numbers of rows, but you do have enough to use AI effectively. And with the extension of AI into different products, like I mentioned ChatGPT, which everybody knows about, the key there is understanding how to frame the prompt. But yeah, AI Trilogy, which is put out by Ward Systems, they're located, I think, in Frederick, Maryland. And I don't use any of the stock market stuff because I don't do stock market things. But I have been using their tool in business for at least 20 years. And it has changed very little. It's a very stable algorithm. It's like a correlation calculation. That doesn't change. It's been the same for like 80 or 90 years since it was originally developed. Okay, so, it's like a math equation. It's going to stay that way. And they do work. And I've been very pleased with that. And there are other tools, by the way. It's not the only one. It's just, it seems to be an easy tool to set up. And it's a neural net approach to doing correlation and regression type stuff. But also when you use a genetic algorithm, particularly when you have very few rows, you have to use something like a genetic algorithm to see what's going to emerge as the most dominant thing. And that works. And when I've gone back to executives and I showed them the list that come out of this, they go, "Wow, how did you get that? How did you get that?" They said it's pretty accurate. They may change one or two things, one or two positions based on their experience, but they said it would have taken them weeks to do that. To put the list together, to do the analysis, to get a team together, and all this other stuff. It just it's a costly and time-consuming to do it. Whereas here we use tools and we use some techniques.
Well, thank you so much, Frank. Regretfully, I have to cut you off there, but reminder to everyone, you can reach out to him, and this presentation will be available on the PMBA, there we go, Global Fall Conference. Thank you so much again for your time, Frank.
Thank you very much, everybody.